Good afternoon, everybody. As we see the participant ticker going up, which is great, let me introduce myself and get us started. I'm Carmen Shepa, Dean of the Bouvet College of Health Sciences, and I welcome you all to our webinar series today on women who inspire at the forefront of healthcare. Today, we will engage in a discussion about the trailblazing innovation in the pharmacy field and profession. We invite everybody to ask questions, provocative questions, and generate ideas. You will be hearing from our alumni and faculty, and it really would be an exciting opportunity to ask questions about their pathways and your own pathway in the field. Before we get started, let me thank the planning committee and ask our colleague Crosby and Wright to please go over the ground rules for the webinar today. Crosby.
Thanks, Dean Shepa. Welcome, everybody. As we settle in, we just want to share a few best practices and notes for the event. We are recording this, and the recording will be circulated afterwards. To assist us with taking attendance, we ask that you please try to have your first and last name listed in the participants window. If you've joined from another device, such as a family member's iPad or your iPhone, you may need to rename yourself. I'll post instructions in the chat on how to do this. And if you can't access this feature for whatever reason, you're welcome to message me privately in the chat window with your name. To raise a question or comment during the presentation, please use the chat window. We're hoping for a lively conversation, so please just submit questions or comments as they come up. You can type your question or comment there at any time, and we'll address it in the Q&A portion the second half of the event. When your question or comment is raised, you're welcome to unmute yourself at that time if you'd like to add on. As a courtesy, we ask that you please remain muted unless it's your time to speak. You're welcome to leave your webcam on for the duration of the event. It would be great to see everybody's faces. However, you do not have to. And with that, I'll turn it back to Dean Shepa and our presenters.
Thank you, Crosby. So I'm really delighted to introduce our distinguished speakers today and moderator. Our speakers are Melanie Smith and Rebecca Velez Frey, both alums in the Bouvet College of Health Sciences, and they'll have an opportunity to tell you more about themselves and also their work. And the moderator today is Professor Andrew Orskirvin, who is the chair and clinical professor in the Department of Pharmacy and Health System Sciences, and he is also the director of the Pharmaceutical Industry Fellowship Program. Andrew.
Thank you, Dean Shepa, and welcome everyone. We're really happy to have people here today. As Dean Shepa mentioned, I'm the chair of Pharmacy and Health System Sciences, and we do a lot of teaching in the Doctor of Pharmacy program, as well as providing clinical work around the city of Boston and support pharmacy education around the city and state and regionally as well. I'm gonna give a little bio, and I know there's a number of potential people interested in pharmacy's careers. So I'll divulge some stories that I don't always tell everybody, but I went to Oregon State University and for my bachelor's in pharmacy, and then I went to get my doctor of pharmacy at the University of Texas, and then after that I took a faculty position in New York at St. John's University, and then in 2007 came to Northeastern University. One of the things, especially as prospective people and just anyone thinking of pharmacy as a career, I had two parents who were pharmacists. And when I went to Oregon State, I didn't want to do what my parents did, but I liked pharmacy. I just didn't want to kind of follow in their path. So for about 4 weeks of my freshman year, I was a hotel and restaurant management major in the College of Business, and I hated it. And I went in on my own and talked to the advisors at the School of Pharmacy there, and switched majors and kind of got on track because I knew I was more of a science person. So my story there is that we never know where we're going to go. I've been a hematology oncology pharmacist for a long time and had a lot of patient impact, but right now I'm really focused on leading education, creating opportunities for students, and helping you and our alumni who come out of the program project their careers as far as they want or whatever direction they want. So that's the introduction I'll give for myself. but I will turn things over to Melanie to give a brief introduction as well.
Hi, I'm Melanie Smith, and I graduated from Northeastern University College of Pharmacy, class of 1975. Today, I am a retired pharmacist, retired cosmetic product formulator who used to work at Erno Laszlo Institute and Mary Kay Cosmetics, and I volunteer as a political advocate to improve the pharmacy profession in the state of Texas. And I look forward to sharing more with you about my career journey.
Hi everyone, I'm Rebecca Velez Frey. I am a PharmD. I graduated in 1998 from Bouvet. I work as an executive in the biotechnology sector and have spent most of my career working in different aspects of industry, ranging from large pharma to now very small biotech. So I have been very much looking forward to this conversation and sharing a little bit more about some of the maybe non-traditional paths that I took in my career.
Great, welcome. So Melanie's going to start off and give us a little more in-depth look at her story and things that you might have questions about. Please feel free to put in the chat and I'll be filtering those to the speakers.
Okay, well, I want to thank the Bouvet team for inviting me to participate in today's session, because this invite was just one more example of how Northeastern continues to influence me. It inspired me to reflect. I had a lot of years to go back and reflect since I graduated in '75, and to reconnect with those who helped me and made a difference in my career. And I'm excited to share with you today my path from pharmacy to cosmetic industry to political advocacy. And it all started when I was in high school. I had a part-time job in high school working for my family's pharmacist. And my pharmacist boss, Harry Hunter, was so good at cosmetics, and he told me, you know, Mel, the reason I know so much about cosmetics is because in pharmacy school, I took a cosmetic formulation class, and we made lipsticks and creams and lotions. And he goes, you know what? The bottom line is a suppository and a lipstick are the same technology. That connection amazed me. He encouraged me to apply to pharmacy school because he said there are opportunities out there. And especially being a woman, and remember this is 1969, he said, you'll get a good paying part-time job after you get married and start a family. And I said, well, that sounds great, Harry, you know. Anyway, I applied to Northeastern, had a great time at Northeastern, and I worked for a year in a Rhode Island independent pharmacy. Well, actually, within that year, after 6 months, I realized, I went, oh my God, this is not co-op. I am not going back to school. This is my life. And with my husband, Bruce's encouragement, I applied to the University of Rhode Island's graduate school and their pharmacy college. And I attended school full-time, excuse me. I was working part-time in the pharmacy, and I worked to school full-time doing cosmetic research and serving as a teaching assistant. After graduation, my husband and I were ready for a change, and we took off for Europe for 6 months. When we came back, we agreed that whoever got a job first, that's where we would go. And that was my opportunity to pursue my dream of making cosmetics. I got the job first, and we moved to Trumbull, Connecticut, home of Cheeseboro Pond's Research and Development Labs, where I created skincare formulas for the prestige cosmetic brand, the Erno Laszlo Institute. I was so excited to learn that 2 of the 4 men who interviewed me were pharmacists. One of those pharmacists, John McCook, became my manager and my mentor. I knew I made the right choice entering this industry. 4 years later, after using so many of my cosmetic and pharmacy compounding skills, I got a job offer from Mary Kay Incorporated. And they asked me to come in and create a new basic skincare line for them. My husband and I fell in love with Dallas and its opportunities, its affordability, and the people. The world of Mary Kay was fantastic. The opportunities were everywhere at Mary Kay for me. My project work was fun and challenging, and I collaborated on cross-functional teams that involved marketing and legal, and production and other R&D departments. I got to meet so many people and do so many things and use my formulating skills that I learned in pharmacy school, as well as at Cheeseboro Ponds. I gave presentations to the cosmetic industry and the Mary Kay sales force. And actually, John McCook returned to my life again as Vice President of Research and Development at Mary Kay. The company encouraged me to pursue an MBA and get involved in community activities. I moved into the management ladder and began sharing the beauty of cosmetic science at career days with pre-K to high school students. I joined not-for-profit boards, and I held a variety of positions in the Society of Cosmetic Chemists at the national and area levels. My son Andrew was born in Dallas. Mary Kay allowed me the opportunity to watch him grow up and still have advancement and challenges in my job. And after 25 years of a professionally and rewarding career at Mary Kay, I retired as Director of Product Development. Well, I can't sit still, and then opportunity knocked again. A year later, I got an offer to consult for cosmetic marketers. I founded my own business and called it the Melanie Smith Product Development Consultant. My tagline was bridging the worlds of cosmetic R&D and marketing. My biggest challenge was recognizing I did not have a huge staff and millions of dollars to test and develop products like I did at Ponds and Mary Kay. But I adapted and I thrived on the excitement of the fast pace and the greater risk-taking of the world of startups and small companies. While I was consulting, because I just wasn't busy enough, I guess, I wanted to get involved in community level and use my pharmacy and cosmetic formulation skills, working about 10 hours a week. I studied and I got my Texas pharmacy license, and I found a job at the neighborhood compounding pharmacy. I also volunteered for the Dallas County Medical Reserve Corps, where I've put my managerial and pharmacy skills to good use in the community. I got my political start in volunteering for local candidates in 2008 after I retired from Mary Kay. In 2015, my son Andrew, who managed Dallas area political campaigns, suggested I file for the vacant position in my precinct chair. Today, I serve as a precinct chair, an election judge. I canvass for local and state candidates. I'm a community organizer for my neighborhood, getting our streets and services improved. And in my role as a political advocate for pharmacy legislation in the as a political advocate for the pharmacy profession in Texas, I give nonpartisan legislative updates to the Dallas Area Pharmacy Association at their monthly meetings. I mentor pharmacy students at the Pharmacy Day at the Capitol during legislative sessions, and I serve as a resource to my state legislator on bills impacting the pharmacy profession. With each new adventure, my pharmacy background has given me the foundation to touch people's lives. I listen and I advise on health concerns. I create cosmetics to make people feel and look good. I mentor to help them develop to be the best they can be. I'm serving on non-for-profit boards, and I advocate for a better community and profession. And I look forward to sharing with you even more about how this all ties in with my pharmacy degree at Northeastern.
Thank you so much, Melanie. We're going to let Rebecca tell a little bit more about herself, and then we'll be opening up the Q&A. So if you have questions brewing, feel free to start posting those.
Thank you so much, Andrew and Melanie. That was a tremendous story, especially very inspired by all of your community service, which is really remarkable, and sounds like you're having a huge impact in your community, which is just great. So, so my story is, I guess, a little bit different. I entered pharmacy after working in a little community pharmacy growing up when I was in high school. and in Connecticut. And, I entered as a first generation college student, very naive, and but also not knowing much about the field besides this community aspect. And it was really through the co-op program when I started working in some of the Boston area hospitals that I really became very interested in acute patient care, intensive care, and organ transplantation and immunology, which are areas that are still I'm very passionate about. But I ended up sort of focusing a lot on hospital service, and found a faculty member within Bouvet who began to mentor me, who was doing a lot of clinical pharmacology research. She introduced me to clinical trials, and I got to start helping her run early phase pharmacology studies and healthy volunteer studies in Boston. And from that point, I really became completely hooked that the process of drug development was fascinating to me. And, I really wanted to, and I could see myself, enjoying and having an impact in that space. So I had pretty much known by the time I graduated that I was going to go in that direction. And I put together, kind of a fellowship program with that faculty to do some more research and try to accomplish some publications before I would move on to industry. So during my student years, I had made some connections in industry and eventually found my way into a very entry-level position in a large pharma company to run clinical trials. And I think, one of the benefits of working in a large pharma company, and this is something I tell a lot of students that I mentor, is that there are tremendous learning opportunities when you go to a large company. They have substantial training programs. You have the opportunity to see how drugs are developed and marketed from a truly global perspective. And you can learn about, the regulatory process, the research and discovery process, and everything in between. So I spent my early years in large pharma and running transplant clinical studies, which was incredibly exciting. I moved into medical affairs as I became more and more interested in the communications aspect of industry. And that allowed me to go out in the field with key opinion leaders at major transplant centers around New England and work directly with those investigators to design their own protocols and to connect them to sort of the mothership of the company in terms of development strategy and advising about new drugs to develop in transplantation. After about 6 years at a large company, I started to become a little itching for more challenge. And in the back of my mind, I sensed I might flourish in a smaller company where there'd be even more opportunities for hands-on experiences. And so as part of a personal relocation, I decided to go into a smaller company, which was at the time just about to launch their first product. And I ended up staying at that company for 11 years. That was a very transformative experience for me because it was an organization that valued not only diversity, but learning. It was just a learning environment. And I had the opportunity to learn and try a lot of different functional responsibilities. So I started in medical affairs on a product launch. I moved into project management and learned project management from an R&D perspective. I got to work on some new product submissions from that responsibility. I then got to move into corporate project management and working with the CEO and the executive team, which opened up the doors of learning the financial aspects of the organization, the commercial aspects, the investor management aspects. It was a large public company by then. And also I worked with the board of directors and became very interested in governance through those experiences. So, and then ultimately in that company, I took a leap to go into manufacturing and learn manufacturing and became a leader in manufacturing and quality. So all of these twists and turns are kind of a result of me being in an environment where it was welcomed for people to try new things, which is, sometimes I would say hard to find, but also I was able to gain some credibility by having that open-mindedness, being willing to take some risks, and then always being good at transferring those skills to the new and different functions. And along the way, I also kind of rose in terms of management rank and eventually became a vice president in that company. And, got to enjoy also then developing other people to follow a similar path, which was really is something that I find very rewarding. After 11 years, it was, again, I found myself wanting a new challenge. And I think all of this was becoming preparation to eventually run companies. And so I have been now working in biotechnology companies the last few years. These are small companies. They're in their first phase of financing, privately owned venture-backed companies. And I have been working as a chief operating officer, which is sort of a jack of all trades of these companies. I run everything from clinical trials to research programs, regulatory, day-to-day finances. Currently in a facility where we're building a new lab, so I wear a construction hat for part of the day. And working as part of the executive team to build a strategy and to figure out how to continue to capitalize the company and how to, really create value for society and for our stakeholders in terms of trying to develop transformative drugs. So along the way, again, especially the last few years, I've felt more comfortable, and I've said this to some of the organizers leading up to today, more comfortable sort of using my voice and to encourage the people that I work with in my field to develop women, to develop people of color, to create more opportunities for folks who have the motivation and the aspiration. So I enjoy that a lot, and I'm very involved in organizations that support women and people of color in biotechnology and pharma. And I enjoy mentoring students and young professionals. So this is a big part of why I'm here. And I think I see some of the students that I've mentored logged in. So hi, hope you guys are doing well. This is a joy. I think pharmacy education gave me a foundation to build a career, and it's not anywhere that I thought I was starting. But I have learned leadership and communication and cross-functional management and things that really are applicable in any field. So that's a little bit about me, and I also managed to raise 3 children along the way, and I think they're doing okay. So that's another, very important aspect of my life. And I love sharing what I do with them as well. So I'll stop there.
Thank you both so much for sharing. We appreciate your insights and especially perspective as women in the field of pharmacy. We actually do have a first question. It's from Leona Slater, and she, I think, is asking Rebecca, what brought on the switch from hospital to research and clinical trials? Like, what was the motivation behind that?
Yeah, like I said, I was working with this faculty, and she was doing clinical translational research on drug metabolism. And so she was working in the hospital, and she was partnering with investigators there to run healthy volunteer studies. And I just became fascinated with sort of the process in terms of generating a hypothesis, but trying to test it in a human system, which is much more complex than I had appreciated up until that point. And it just sort of opened up this whole other space in terms of learning for me. So, and I thought, this is the type of work that I would find intellectually stimulating because it's research, but it connects to patients. And I could see how even early stage clinical research leads to important breakthroughs that benefit patients at the end of the day. Because I never wanted to do something where I didn't feel that my work had an impact that I could sense in terms of patients. So it was very situational. It was because I was with a great mentor, and she gave me a spark. And once I started learning more about what I could do in industry, it was pretty clear that I had a lot of options, and I never really looked back. I'm not saying I do miss working in the hospital. I spent many night shifts in the IV room. So those are good memories, but I enjoy what I do.
I want to touch on what you just said about, you talked about the people, how you could help people. And that's something that I always think, and I think as pharmacists, we learn compassion, and that's always part of us. Yeah, we learn a lot of knowledge, and there's so many drugs we learn and how to do things and think critically, which are so important, but it's that compassion and touching people's lives that I kept hearing in your message, and I feel the same way. So I hope that all the young pharmacy students out there, I mean, that's the best thing you can do for people, is to listen, ask questions, and help them out. And mentoring is just so rewarding, so rewarding.
And yeah, and I think to build on that, one thing I was hoping that would come up in this conversation is just trying to dispel any notion that a career in industry is not somehow connected to patients. And I think when I was younger and I was thinking about leaving, academia and clinical practice to go to industry, a lot of people said to me, well, you're moving away from your core, you're moving away from, benefiting patients. But I can't tell you how many experiences I've had where I've gotten to really appreciate directly the benefit to patients, especially having worked in a company that worked into rare disease areas. And we had one story is, my favorite story to tell is, an 18-month-old boy who was in the ICU and multi-organ failure, dying of an unknown disease. They ultimately discovered that he had atypical hemolytic uremic syndrome. We have a drug that is very effective for this. And, that the ICU doctors talked about how, he was unconscious in the ICU, and they were telling the family to make arrangements. And 24 hours later, he was standing up in his crib in the ICU, trying to get out. He was so playful. And that boy came to our office and was doing laps around the auditorium, and, we were just weeping, right? Society at large, there's a lot of controversy, I think, about drugs and healthcare and how people get access to medicines, and those are all very important conversations. But the work has to be done, and it's highly regulated. It's highly complex. It needs experts. It needs people who are persistent and resilient. And it is littered with failure. 80% of the drugs we develop fail to get to market. So it is a tremendous place to make an impact. Tremendous, right? It's so important, and I really think it is absolutely an area where we need exceptional healthcare leaders from all disciplines to be working, because what the ultimate patient needs are and societal needs are.
Yeah. Awesome. And I had the same thing. I know we have another question pending, but I was just going to give everyone my keywords that I heard from the speakers. Advocacy and making a difference are huge when you think about why do you want to be in health careers, pharmacy, and others as well. But for me, making a difference and helping people, but that translates so strongly into advocacy, impact, learning and transferability of your skills, and innovation really are things that I heard from both of you. There's a lot of things we can continue on, but I want to try the next question that got posted for us. And it's open for both. What are the most important things you learned during your time at Northeastern that you have used during your career to be nimble in your career transitions? So what that foundational things from Northeastern have you been able to leverage for your career?
Okay, I will say that it was the ability to think critically and to adapt, because I had circumstances happen. I had to adapt at Northeastern, and I had to persevere. And I learned to persevere because I wasn't always going to take all the pharmacy classes they wanted as pharmacy electives. I'll give you a little example. I actually took a costume design class, and I got called in by the dean about why would I want to do that. And I said, well, I want to do something besides take pharmacy, right? And I was also involved in the theater as extracurricular. And then I wanted to do an independent research project, because I didn't forget that a suppository and a lipstick are the same technology. So I worked with Dr. P.S. Smith on an independent research project to help to build. I made a blue mask, and it was great. It was great fun, and it dyed my roommates and my face blue. But you know what? FD&C colors go away after 3 days of washing, so it's no big deal. But those are, and being creative and open to the opportunities, whatever you can comes your way. And when chances came up, like I could do this project under Dr. Smith, was just so amazing to me that Northeastern allowed that. But I had to persevere for that.
I agree with you on all those points. And, what comes to mind for me is cross-functional work and cross-functional collaboration and communication. So, when we were sent out into the world to go work in our co-ops, we had to quickly adapt from being in our isolated pharmacy lens to, being on the ground, working with our nursing colleagues and our physician colleagues and PA colleagues. And, you have to become so effective at working across, disciplines. And that is universally important, no matter what your work environment is. But it's certainly very, very helpful in the pharmaceutical industry in terms of, all the enterprises that are here are built upon, a cross-functional matrix. So I think that cross-functional capability is incredibly valuable going forward.
I listened to you both. When we all went into pharmacy, we think, there's traditional things you're thinking about. And even in my own career, I just have the question, playing it safe is and not taking any risks, is that how your game plan? Or did you take some risks in areas where you weren't 100% comfortable to get where you are now? And how can we translate that message to young pharmacists and prospective pharmacy students?
Yeah, I took a lot of risks. I'm that type of person, I guess, but I think I took those risks, especially as it relates to trying new areas, because I felt supported. I always felt like I had someone there, whether it was a mentor or a manager, who understood that I might have some learnings and that I might need some support. But taking risks, I think from a career perspective, is the best way to sort of expand your perspective, because if you can stay within one area, and this is common in industry to some extent. People kind of work in clinical operations and stay there for 20 years, and you can do that if you love it. But if you want to have a broader perspective and try lots of different things, it's certainly very easy to do that in industry. You have to be willing to fail, though, and I think for me, I went from areas where I was very experienced and confident and knew that I could always be a top performer, and then jumped into like manufacturing, which I'd never done before. And the big risk there is that you just totally fail, or maybe takes a longer time to become successful. And I was worried about that. But it opened up a whole new area for me that I absolutely love. So I encourage people to be willing to do that, but make sure you have someone that is a sounding board for you as you think about making those changes and how to make the best of it.
Yeah, I'm with you there. It's having that support, the mentor, whether it's family or someone in your work, is so important. That encouragement my family gave me meant so much to me, and also my mentors along the way. And taking those chances, I find I embrace challenge. I consider a challenge an opportunity. And I remember it was scary to say, oh, I'm going to go into cosmetics from pharmacy. I also had the attitude that, well, if I can't get a job in cosmetics, I can always go be a pharmacist again. That was my attitude back then. And here I went back later and became a pharmacist in my retirement again. But it was always there. And I always considered pharmacy my insurance policy. That's why I kept my 4 licenses. And it's been great. And people also, when you say you're a pharmacist, there's something about your credibility goes up instantly, because people know what a pharmacist is. But then when you say, okay, I took a chance and I went into cosmetics and I just thrived in it. I just loved it. I stayed in it because I kept having new opportunities arise. I kept running into new chances. All of a sudden I was talking to legal and helping them develop, write patents and things like that. I was working with production and mechanics on how to make my formula become beautiful and work at making 1 million units, a day. And it was very important to me to go through that. And then when I got into the opportunity to open a consulting business, I went, do I really want to work? Because I didn't have to work. And I thought, well, you know what, if I don't do it, I'm going to kick myself, because the worst thing that can happen is I'm not good at it. Well, turns out I was really good at it. And I did it for 10 years. I did it on a part-time basis. And like I said, I learned so much working with small companies and startups. You know, I think it's exciting, Rebecca, you're working with smaller companies and startups after being in a big place, and just that opportunity to try new things quickly, because I'll tell you, Ponds was a great learning experience, but it took years to get things out the door. And I was fortunate. I worked at Erno Laszlo, which was a tiny brand that, you know, they made a lot of money on that brand, but it was small. They weren't worried about Vaseline intensive care lotion type volume. So I could take more risk, which was exciting for me. So I always found it was good to take that challenge. And then when someone asked me, hey, you want to volunteer in politics? It was like, all right, I'll try it. It was always like, all right, I'll try it. But I did my research. I want to talk about something about critical thinking. And that's where, as pharmacists, we learn, think it through, analyze, and make a judgment. So I always did my research. I didn't just jump in and say, oh, da-da, I'm a political advocate. I did my research. I did my homework. And I turned out I enjoyed every single step I took along the way. Yeah, there were some failures and times I'd bang my head on the wall, but in the end, I'm so glad I did what I did.
That's a really good point. And I'm just going to ask a follow-up question, but if anyone has questions, please feel free to post them in the chat. Pharmacy we learn a lot of science, and again, usually the education focuses on how we can help people through various avenues. As you mentioned, in pharma, developing new things is helping people as well. In your career, have you relied on that science basis to be able to do what you've been able to do?
Absolutely. You know, I mean, I guess it depends on which direction you go, but in the last few years, especially in these smaller companies I'm involved in as part of a team that's analyzing data, looking at either, you know, discovery data from in vitro or in vivo models, or early clinical data, looking at the pharmacokinetics and pharmacodynamics of drugs and patients, and designing protocols and determining the appropriate patient populations. So those fundamental you know, skill sets and knowledge bases and understanding how to interpret clinical data in particular is very, very useful, very important. And also I think, you know, people look to PharmDs in particular as they know they're drug experts. So, you know, you get pulled into functions that have especially heavy needs for scientific communication and medical information and things like that. So from my perspective, it's these are everyday uses. I'm very much involved. You don't have to be at the bench to be doing science. That's, you know, very much how it's played out from my perspective.
Yeah. You know, something happened recently that just blew my mind away when I finished working early voting a couple of weeks ago in Dallas, and my judge said something to me about why I was so valuable writing these reports every night at the end of the day for, you know, vote counts. And she said, it's because you're a pharmacist background, you pay attention to details. And as a pharmacy student, as a pharmacist, if you don't get those details, you know, it's like in cosmetics. So if you screwed up the batch, well, you threw it away and maybe somebody would be mad at you, but you could make it over again. The patient didn't die. If you make a mistake in your calculation or your weighing in pharmacy, the patient could be dead. And that was always a lesson I would teach my, we had a rotation at Mary Kay, actually. They did a non-traditional rotation for P4s. And that was the lesson. I said, remember, think of this batch as your patient. So it was, so that was one thing. So details were very important in pharmacy, in your job, and even as an election clerk, very important. So I always had good counts. The other thing is, as a pharmacist, yes, we learn about active ingredients. And this is one of the things I noticed when I went back to pharmacy. You know, I was 30 years, I hadn't practiced pharmacy. It was pretty scary. But I had technicians, there were books to look at things up in. And what was good is that pharmacy background and that cosmetic background together taught me not only about looking at your key or your active ingredient and what it does, but the inactive ingredients. And my value I brought back at the compounding pharmacy was, hey, those inactive ingredients can make a big difference on how things work, how long they last. I mean, Rebecca knows this if she's doing drug development. If you don't have a good stable base, it doesn't matter what your active ingredient does. You need to deliver it somehow. So all those things I used in my pharmacy, from my pharmacy background and every day in all the careers I did.
Yeah, I agree that precision and detail work and that kind of science basis, we take it to so many other things. And it translates to the work that myself, and I see Julia is on the call, developing the pharmacy industry fellowship programs. It's easy to have a conversation as me as a pharmacist when we go to meet with a new partner and understand the science that they're doing to try to alleviate a certain disease or entity that they're trying to develop treatments for, and you can discuss like what is your purpose and what are you trying to achieve. So it's really nice to have that kind of healthcare core and science and precision. And I see actually there's two questions. One is from, I think it's Deidre. What are the biggest challenges or ethical dilemmas you have had to deal with, and how did you deal with them?
It's a great question. I can speak to it from an industry perspective, or at least as a drug developer, that probably the biggest ethical challenge you face as a drug developer is deciding when to terminate a program. I talked earlier about the failure is very high, and especially when I was working in rare disease, it's very hard to make the call and say, there's just not enough data here to support going forward when you're dealing with, a patient population that is facing fatality, that has no treatments. Most of the work we did in those diseases, there are no treatments. But these types of decisions, they have to be grounded in data and understanding objectively and looking objectively at your data. I think everyone has to check and manage their own bias, because you can want and hope for something and you can feel that it was an excellent idea, but sometimes it just doesn't have the benefit that is, the bar for benefit to actually put a drug to market is very high. So those have been very difficult conversations and processes. And, my approach has always been to make sure that the decisions are objective and based on data. And I think every drug developer faces these things. I think there's other challenges related to fighting for resources, just like any other business. There's only so much that can be funded. But those are easier in comparison. I think deciding to shelf something is very challenging. So.
Well, I had to shelf a lot of projects too in cosmetics, but my heart goes out to you thinking when it's some drugs and you were working with people's lives like that, because like I said, yes, it's too bad the product didn't go in cosmetics. Company lost some money, but no lives were lost. And there were products that sometimes you're going, I had a beautiful sunscreen I made that back in the days before you could use avobenzone in the United States. I made a product just for Canada. And this thing tested beautifully. It gave okay, this is in like late 1980s. So sun care research has come a long way since then. But it worked beautifully, had an SPF 35. It was waterproof. It did everything it was supposed to do. And then we went through the safety testing and we started getting some results we didn't like. And, oh, it hurt me. But like you said, you have to be objective and go, this is beautiful. And I never got any reactions to it, but you have to make some decisions, and it happens in every industry. Do you make decisions like, do I still want to deal with that candidate after I saw what he's been doing? I mean, it happens to us every day in what we do, so.
Great. Well, Deidre put a thank you up for your answers. We have another one. The question is, do you see any COVID-19 impact on pharmaceutical industry and education in the near future or the long run? Like, how is COVID changing things?
Yeah, so COVID has had a tremendous impact on the pharmaceutical industry, I think on many fronts. On the one hand, it has really suppressed a lot of activity because of the difficulty in executing, for example, a lot of clinical trials. It will create lasting change in terms of streamlining of clinical trial designs, maximizing actually the use of telehealth in clinical trials, wearables, technologies that have been, advancing, but I think have needed a push. And so in many ways, these are good changes that will likely come from this in order for people to continue to advance drug development. I think from a healthcare investing side, just, there's a rethinking of investing in public health and in antibiotics and antivirals. These are notoriously underfunded programs because they are usually not very profitable. And many companies have had good antibiotics and have had to go bankrupt. So I think there's a much needed resurgence of investment. It takes very large scale investment to develop antibiotics and antivirals, and also to make those programs accessible globally and not just for developed nations. So all of that momentum is coming now, and I think that is extremely positive. And then there's obviously this real, incredible effort to develop therapeutics and vaccines. I think obviously there's some controversy surrounding this, but it's laying bare for our country at least, and I think for the world at large, the difficulties in developing drugs. That everybody wants things quickly, but there are trade-offs associated with speed, and quality and safety are need to be paramount. So, and you need critical mass. You need enough patients in your sample. You need to be able to show statistical benefit. You need to be able to show clinical benefit. Clinical benefit takes time. So it's really upending a lot of processes, and it's creating a lot of good discussion, I think, about how to do this better. And so those things will probably last. I think probably the best thing that could come out of it is, again, more companies, more entities working together to develop therapies that are beneficial for pandemics, and generally more initiatives around public health, which again has been underfunded over time.
Well, I'm going to jump on one thing that I've seen because of my involvement talking to legislators is I see this as an opportunity, because in the state of Texas, we've been trying for 10 years to get pharmacists approved to test and treat for strep and flu. Well, it keeps getting, this year we got our closest, last year we got our closest, so maybe, but now they allowed us on an emergency basis to do help with COVID testing. Well, if you can do that, why can't you do a test and treat for flu and strep? So I think that will give us a little more support on that effort. I look forward to more in Texas, pharmacists being able to take on more roles, because only this past session were we recognized as providers. So it was a big deal for Texas. So I see that as an opportunity. You also talked about collaborating and taking more risk, because people are, they want, oh, how come it's taking you forever to invent a vaccine? Like, what's the big deal, right? Well, it is a big deal. And like you said, you've got to go through research and testing. And I can remember going back with the challenge of when animal testing started getting the bad vibes. What was that, in the 80s, late 80s? And I was involved on a workshop with Johns Hopkins about alternatives to animal testing and looking at in vitro. And in 1989, that was like, oh my God. And my role was to talk about what kind of surfactants and wetting agents and reagents and stuff we could use in dealing with these in vitro alternatives. So that challenge, that was a challenge. My first reaction, this is when I said embrace opportunities, challenges, and opportunity. That challenge, like first I grumbled, like what's wrong with animal testing, da, da, da. Okay, you gotta remember my mindset where I was back in 1980s and 70s. And instead, I found out what a great opportunity. And it was so exciting to talk to all these researchers and academic people that look at what we could possibly do. And now that has become the norm. So I look forward to all the advances you can make quickly, Rebecca, with taking in mind how much risk you take in safety.
And I appreciate your thoughtful answers. It's really, really good for the group. And we do have another question. We are getting close to the end of our time. So I'm going to ask this question and then kind of do a wrap-up question before we get to the top of the hour. But if anyone has any additional comments, please feel free to put them in the chat. But from Jennifer, she put in the question, knowing what you know now from your experiences, what would you choose as a career path now if you were early in your career? Like if you were going into pharmacy or just coming out of pharmacy school, what would you do?
I'd do the same thing. I wouldn't change a thing. I mean, I'm not saying there weren't challenges on the way, but it was the right path for me. It's been a lot of fun, a lot of fun.
Yeah, I agree. I'm really happy. I don't think I would do anything different. I think as I've moved along, there's some areas that I wished I had deeper knowledge of, and I tried to gain that through experience, like finance, and maybe I could have gotten an MBA along the way, but I never had time. I was really busy, and I feel like I got a lot of hands-on experience, which is, I personally think, is more valuable. So, but no, I wouldn't change it. But I think the younger me had no clue what was going on or where this was going too. So that's a good thing, right?
That's the way it is.
I agree too. I wouldn't change anything. I think the journey is so valuable for learning. I think one thing I've always thought, and I was wondering about your thoughts on this, is that so much of the work we do once we're in the workplace and we're doing project management and team building and team project work, we learn so many things, or we utilize so many things that we weren't taught in school. And I think learning more and taking opportunities is one of the ways that we kind of continue to grow. And I don't know if you feel that way too, but during the day, sometimes I'm like, oh, I never learned this in school. Pharmacy school doesn't teach you everything.
True, but it teaches you how to think. It teaches you how, in co-op, taught you how to work with the customer, and whether it's a hospital or in the pharmacy, local pharmacy. So there were things, and it taught you compassion, because listening to people. There are things that I'm amazed. I go, I guess my pharmacy did help me with that background. Everything along the way, the people I met, the people I worked with, the projects I worked on, the teams I was on, all the opportunities I've learned from. I always would tell my son when he first, got a job, and said, you know what, you're going to have good bosses and bad bosses. And you learn from both of them, because you learn what to do and what not to do. So.
Definitely.
Yeah, I think being open to learning is just completely vital. I think if you want to explore different things, you have to have that open mind, and you have to knock on doors. I think you have to be willing to raise your hand and say, hey, I want to learn, about that other area, and find those opportunities for yourself as well. But I think that learning is what makes it interesting. And I look for companies and teams that have a culture of learning. That's not necessarily a given. You want to align yourself in that way.
Yeah.
So.
And I guess maybe this is a great question for people, is people don't always bring you opportunities. Did you have to say, I can do more, or I want to do more? Is that part of what helped you get to where you are today?
Definitely. Melanie's nodding too.
Yep.
No matter where you go, you have a manager, you have a structure for planning performance, and you have to prepare for those discussions. You have to bring to the table, what you want, and again, you have to be always raising your hand, and not always aligned in those discussions, but you're never going to get something if you don't ask. So I think it's important to make that part of how you view, what you want to do in your next job is part of what you're trying to build in your current job. And that's part of how you plan your objectives, and how you assess your performance and your growth is how ready you are you to go do another thing. So I think that's a good way to kind of approach it.
I think being back to, again, one of those key words which you both talked about was advocacy. We can advocacy for other people, but we have to advocate for ourselves and learn how to say, I can do this, or I can do more, and that you're open to opportunities is how more opportunities open up in your career.
Absolutely.
So we have like 2 or 3 minutes, and I wanted to get your perspective on women in pharmacy and mentoring, and did you have role models that you looked up to that were women, and how do you see yourself now that you're more able to be a mentor, and what do you feel is what you want to give back to people up and coming in pharmacy?
I definitely love giving back. I get a lot of satisfaction mentoring and people calling me for advice, and I do it for people in high school, college, people who just want to make a change. I've had a lot of moms call me and say, would you talk to my daughter or my grandson or whatever about career in chemistry or cosmetics? And it's so important to give back. Most of my mentors were men. And maybe because I was surrounded by men in the jobs I worked in. But I also had at Mary Kay, we had a chief scientific officer, Myra Bacher, and she was amazing. And she was the only woman back then who was in an executive position besides Mary Kay herself. And she was always there to help and listen and understood what you were facing, and that you always had to be a little better, not a little better, a lot better than the guys next to you, she would say. And she's been, to this day, I still talk to her. So it's wonderful. And I love giving back, and anybody who wants to, I'm open. In fact, Northeastern University's called me to talk to students. I'm mentoring on the entrepreneur program right now. So.
Awesome. Thank you.
I always had great mentors, both male and female. Some of those relationships just evolved naturally. People largely I met at school, at co-ops. In my early career, those are people that still support me, and we support each other. And I think the best way to get back is to reach out. I feel responsible for giving back and for helping younger professionals get the career growth that they want, especially again, women and people of color. And I find the best way to have an impact in that regard is to work with organizations who do meaningful work in those areas. So organizations like Women in Bio, this is one example of an organization I support and work a lot with, but there are many others that are out there. And I think that's something that all of us as alumni can be doing. And reaching into the Northeastern community and offering to mentor students. And I also just hoping to participate in the company in the HSC program. But anyway, and my door is open. We have to have our doors open. I think that's just one message I hope we get across to in this type of forum, that it's okay to reach out to us. We're here to help.
Well, thank you so much. We're at the top of the hour. I don't know, Crosby, if we have any administrative things, but I wanted to thank both Melanie and Rebecca for taking time with sharing their thoughts and ideas. Dean Shepa and the team coordinating these programs is so critical and important, and I'm sure you're going to probably get people reaching out to potentially chat or be mentors, and please thank you for all that work that you've done already and what you're going to do going forward. Crosby, is there any other additional administrative things before we close out?
No, thanks so much, Andrew, Rebecca, and Melanie. I think we're all set. Thanks for the great conversation. It was so inspiring to hear your stories.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
Thank you, everyone.